I wanted to say something about why I thought the life of Gene Sullivan would make a great hit movie. I saw him on the 700 Club and TBN and maybe a PM magazine show years ago, and I watched a motorcycle jumper doing a motorcycle jump through a flaming wall of fire who used to travel with EVEL KNIEVEL, and I thought it was the dumbest thing. And he called himself a Christian, and he was using it to glorify God, and I thought that was even dumber. But I got goosebumps listening to him talk, and I actually felt the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as he spoke on every TV show. And if I want to make a disclaimer before I even move on. Nothing I'm about to say about him or myself has anything to do with our own glory. Nothing at all. Because if there's anybody that knows that Jesus is responsible for absolutely everything about who he is, and if I know I'm fully persuaded that it's Jesus that plucked me out of a terrible dark pit that I'd lived in all my life. I know all glory, honor, and praise belongs to God alone, and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit and the inspiration of the Spirit. So I want to tell you about a man who's been inspired by the Spirit ever since I saw him on TV and since he became a Christian and walked away from a $10 million contract of EVEL Knievel's, which is what it would have been turned into. So I almost can see this movie in my mind and my heart. I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called The Butterfly Effect, but with Gene, there's so many variations to his life that could have happened. The man that raised him had a movie made after him called The Odd Couple with Walter Matthau because he was a famous sports writer. But more recently, we could make an ancestors show on the fact that he found out Ernie Nevers is his real father, who's a famous NFL player, was the first inductee in the Hall of Fame, pitched to Babe Ruth, invented the hook shot in basketball. Everything kind of made sense about Gene Sullivan when we found that information out. I think Gene always knew that growing up, he grew up on an airport with a World War II bomber pilot, not just a bomber pilot, but a command bomber pilot. And that was God's divine purpose in his life too, to be that highly trained by a woman who was so highly trained, running a crop dusting business with another woman who was also a command bomber pilot in World War II. So Gene Sullivan was raised by a man named Prescott Sullivan in the movie, portrayed in the movie The Odd Couple, and he wasn't around him a lot, but he was extremely thankful for the times he was. Most of his impartation, though, happened from a grandma who was a Catholic who took him to Catholic church, and he went to the Catholic church when he was little. But then he moved to the airport with his mom in Rifle, Colorado. And growing up, having to be responsible for paper clips and toothpicks on a runway and taking care of pilots from the time he was 8 or 9, getting outside of himself and not being selfish, because every little detail matters outside of you on an airport with airplanes and helicopters in a crop dusting business. And everything mattered on how you were serving and helping other people. He grew up in a hangar, an airport hangar, and the living room was where the pilots came in. So his whole life he was trained to serve and love his brother, care about others, not run away from responsibility like a lot of people I've met, men, but run into it. So he was a different person than I'd ever met altogether. He was highly trained by mom to be his brother's keeper before he ever became a Christian. So when he got offended with his mom, this I'm going to start going through the alternate things that could have happened here as I tell this story. His mom got really upset at him one night when she was drunk, and he was like 18. So him and his buddies drove to a place called Grand Junction, Colorado, and they all joined the Navy. And so he joined the Navy with 4 buddies. Nothing they promised him happened in the Navy, but he did end up on the deck of a ship. I think it's a flag person or yellow coat or yellow jacket. And because of who he was, the commander from the very beginning, when you first go into boot camp, saw this kid is definitely unusual. He's going to be the captain of the commandos. He'd also been trained as a boxer from his mother. His mother trained him to box. That could have been an alternate variation of his world too, because not only did he become the heavyweight boxing champion of the state of California and the Navy, like 2 years in a row, Rocky Marciano was going to train him. He was going to be trained to fight all the big heavies of that day. Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, Holyfield, all those guys were expecting Gene Sullivan to get in the ring with them. And Rocky Marciano, right before Gene was going to sign a contract with him after meeting with him, died in an airplane crash. So here we have another variation. The first variation was his mom got extremely depressed because she planned on Gene Sullivan taking over the airport. We didn't know until she passed away that she was highly depressed when that didn't happen and went on antidepressant drugs after that. So here we are in the movie of his life. His dad is a famous sports writer, says, I don't think anybody's ever interviewed this crazy EVEL Knievel person, but you know, son, can you come maybe be a bodyguard to me today? So if the guy gets crazy on me, I'll have somebody that can keep me safe from him. Well, Gene ends up running off with EVEL Knievel for a couple of years. And then I think he realized, you know, he's really, really thankful for his time with EVEL Knievel. But back then, EVEL Knievel had some good things and bad things about him. He was kind of like a father to him, actually, because Gene never really had a lot of connection with his father. It was very impersonal. EVEL Knievel was not only personal, but kind of fathered him in a way that he's extremely thankful for. But it got to the place where Gene was having to protect him from people that EVEL Knievel was the instigator of the problems, and he just said, you know, I can't do this anymore. And so he departed from EVEL. After that, he ended up going to a breakfast. It was a Fellowship of Christian Athletes breakfast where he ended up getting saved. And he didn't know anything about the Lord. He didn't know anything about being filled with the Spirit. As a matter of fact, a famous baseball pitcher was actually the one doing the breakfast, but a drug addict got up on the stage and he says, you know, I woke up in the middle of the night and the Lord said to me, if you throw away your heroin, I'll heal you. So the guy dumped his heroin in the trash, and Gene's sitting there. The Lord talked to you? The Lord talked to the drug addict? How did the Lord talk to a drug addict? I mean, the Lord only talks to priests. And he's trying to figure out how the Lord talked to the drug addict. Because as a boy, he kept looking at that great big huge Jesus on a cross, wishing he'd open his eyes and talk to him. So nothing that the baseball player said mattered. And the baseball player even knew his sports writer father. But when the drug addict talked, he said, Lord, I wish you'd talk to me. And he bowed his head, and the Lord started talking to him about his sin and his selfishness. And you know, I'm going to move on to part 2 now for anybody who's interested in maybe making a movie or telling a story, even if it's Ancestry.com at this point.